Hello, I'm Jackie Lucky, your financial planning maestro. This series of podcasts is aimed at financial planning professionals and also those who are looking to enter the financial planning profession. We will be talking during the podcast about all things Certified Financial Planner certification related, talking to other CFPs around the world, and also we will be dropping in on some new entrants who've just entered the financial planning profession, and we'll be checking up along the way on a regular basis with them to see how they're getting on. I hope you enjoy today's podcast. Hello and welcome. I'm Jackie Lucky, your financial planning maestro. And in today's podcast, we are talking all about becoming a certified financial planner professional with somebody who has recently become a CFP professional, and that is James Hunt, who's a chartered financial planner at Eldon Financial Planning. Hello, James.
Hi, Jackie.
We are going to talk about your journey to becoming a CFP professional. But before we get into the nitty-gritty of all of that detail, please could you tell us how you got into the financial planning profession?
Yeah, so at university, I knew I wanted to do something in finance. I did international finance and banking, and I hadn't really heard much of financial planning. And I thought I wanted to do something accounting based. On my placement year, I worked at an accountant's, but having done that, I realised that wasn't necessarily for me. I loved working with the numbers, but losing that personal and building relationships with people was something that wasn't quite there. So I quickly realised that it wasn't actually for me. And it wasn't until my final year of university, my mum was meeting with her advisor, coincidentally, while I was home one weekend. And I sat and spoke to him as well, how best to get into the profession. And then I got in touch with, during my final year, I think it was a recruiter who recruited in financial planning, on how to get into the profession and what kind of companies to look out for, what exam route to go down. And straight out of university, went from there. Ended up at one company and then moved to Eldon in 2017. And then from there, progressed through just doing my exams, getting to chartered, and then doing the certification as well.
Wow, fantastic. Well, a man with a purpose of becoming a financial planner, which is great to hear. So how did you come across the CFP and why did you decide to embark on that?
So when I joined Eldon, there was already 3 certified financial planners here, Tony, Joss, who have both since retired, and Gemma. And they spoke really highly of it. They did it when it was under the old IFP.
Yes.
Spoke really highly of it, and how it makes you consider things from a holistic perspective rather than with the exams that you do. When you get the case study at your level 6, it's just you get the questions and you just answer the questions. It's not looking at the broader picture.
Were you already a chartered financial planner before starting on the case study, or did you have to do the level 6 exam?
No, so I was already a chartered planner, but I did my exams through the CII, which is probably the most common route anyway. So I had to do there was like a pathway with the CISI.
The professional assessment.
Yeah. To basically prove your competence that you can do the CFP certification case study.
Excellent. So you got your online assessment done and dusted, and then moved straight on to your case study then.
Yeah, I sat on the professional assessment thing for probably a bit longer than I should have done, but it was just waiting to then do the CFP at the right time and the case study at the right time, so it wasn't
excellent. Right. So tell us a little bit about how you approached the overall case study itself.
First of all, I kind of read the case study, kind of got to know the client inside out, if you like, and really trying to read between the lines, see what underlyingly she was looking for. And then I built the financial plans, all the spreadsheets that I would use for that. And once I was happy with that, along the way of doing that as well, whenever there was an assumption made, I would document absolutely everything because it was fresh in my mind at the time.
Yeah.
Whereas if I hadn't done that, I think coming back to it would have been much harder, and it was so much simpler to then just drop those bits in as and when they came up. But once I was happy with the plan, I then essentially wrote it up. The write-up was far simpler than I expected because I'd spent so long on the plan and I knew it inside out, knew it was all correct. So it kind of worked.
Okay. And were there any specific areas that you found tough or struggled with along the way?
The main thing I would say was in the report, wanting to write everything to the nth detail, but because we were limited by the 60 pages, to be concise, get the points down quickly and quite shortly so that I wasn't hindering something elsewhere, but also concentrating more on the specific areas and what was going to gain me marks rather than writing a big piece for 2 pages on a tiny bit in the marking criteria as such.
Okay. And so it was just kind of getting your head round, when you've only got 60 pages, you haven't got that, that much space, have you? So it's about being succinct, isn't it? And not waffling too much.
Yeah, exactly. I wrote it all out initially and then come back to it and thought, I waffled too much there. I can shorten this. I can make this more concise. Then reading some bits and thinking, actually, is this adding any value to the report? Is this actually going to gain me any marks? If not, take it out.
Yeah. And how did you find the building of the spreadsheets that went along with all of that?
I think quite straightforward, if you like, but I think it was more so because I had a single lady client, whereas I think if on some of the other case studies whereby there was a couple and there was a lot of different scenarios to consider, it may have been more tricky. But also, I think because the figures flowed and I was pretty confident they worked first time, I found that more simple. Had I made a mistake somewhere, that may have been more tricky. But after each time I'd built one spreadsheet, I would then kind of go back test it, make sure I was happy with it, and then move on to the next one. And I just found that easier doing it that way, because if I had made a mistake but got to the end of them, then looking for that mistake would be so much more difficult.
Yes, they do turn into kind of one big blob after a while, don't they? So it's it's a great approach to taking one step at a time, and just you have to give yourself that kind of headspace and time to think it through, don't you? So you don't it's not just a case of kind of going, I'm just gonna bash them out, knock them out, as somebody said to me the other day, and all will be fine. It's not quite, it doesn't quite work like that.
No, I kind of broke it down as well. So when I was doing one spreadsheets, for instance, on my protection, and if I say I'd set aside an afternoon to do that one, and then I'd have done something in the morning, so that in the afternoon I was just fully focused on doing that one, kind of had a break in between doing them. Then I was focused on getting that one correct, doing my research at the same time and building everything into that, so that I was just focused on one specific area at each point. And I found for me that kept me in a clear headspace to be able to do those different bits.
Yes, absolutely. And everybody's different, aren't they? You've got to find your own method. I'm sure that you've listened to other people giving their opinions about how they think you should approach it on this podcast as well. But actually, you've got to find what works for you, haven't you?
Yeah, absolutely. Even just working at different times of the day, everyone's different. I found it better in doing a lot more in the afternoon, mainly on the weekend, doing more in the afternoon, having a break, and then doing stuff in the later evening. That just worked for me.
Yes, I don't think I could do that. I think I'd be asleep at my desk doing it, but I'm a morning person. But like you say, it's each to their own. It's about you getting the best out of yourself, isn't it, after all?
Yeah, definitely. And just learning when you're going through it, recognizing when your concentration starting to wane a bit, and learning when your concentration's at its peak.
Yeah. And so were there any technical aspects, as far as your technical knowledge goes, where you kind of thought with the case study, I need to pause here and brush up anything? Or did you find that, your experience as a chartered financial planner and then doing that professional assessment bridge paper, was that sufficient? Or, were there areas where you kind of thought, maybe I'll just go away and just have a quick swat up a particular area?
I don't think so. I went away and checked everything anyway, just so that I was certain on things. But I don't think there was anything where I thought, oh, I don't know the rule on this. I was, I'd say 90 to 95% certain on what I was writing, and then I would just go away and double check it just to be certain. And I think, again, that's come from having the technical knowledge from being chartered. And because I've been chartered, it'll be 3 years now. So I've had kind of 3 years professional experience alongside that as well, rather than just textbook experience. So I've already had that experience in applying it to real world scenarios too, which has helped, which has definitely helped.
And I think you're right. I think it makes a difference actually having some real world experience coming into the case study, doesn't it? Because you can kind of say, oh, well, yes, I had a client that was in this similar situation. These are the kind of things that I, talked about or, proposed to the client, recommended that they do. I think we do get people who don't have much experience at all. And sometimes it's a positive because they can soak it all up. But sometimes you could just kind of mentally blow a gasket. Because this is such a big piece of work, it's not really the time you want to be blowing a gasket and learning new stuff as well, is it?
No, not at all. And the one area I think it really helped was when making the recommendation is then being able to document real world how it will work and kind of the process of what needs to be followed through.
Yes.
Rather than, which is something you don't pick up from a textbook and just doing the exams.
Yeah, absolutely. And so tell us how you got on with your first submission.
So I failed the first submission, and it was a simple error that was I hadn't justified the reason for using an annuity over drawdown, and that knocked me down in quite a lot of areas. And it was in making the changes, it was 2 pages of text to add in, and that changed the score dramatically on my resubmission.
Yes.
But it was something that was so simple that I think I just took for granted.
Not unusual.
No, yeah, it's just remembering to cover absolutely all bases and not assume that some things are given.
Yes. And interesting how one thing, not even an error actually, but an omission in the case study in your financial plan made such a dramatic difference to your overall score. And that's because it's having that knock-on effect in a number of different areas, wasn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And there was other little things that I'd omitted that were kind of 1 or 2 line sentences that would have just got me extra marks as well.
Yes. And so you fixed that bit and then passed with flying colours.
Yeah.
Excellent. Congratulations. Very well done. And so looking back now, how do you have a feeling of how long all of that took you to get through? So from picking up the case study right through to passing your assessment?
I would say around 85 to 90 hours in total, possibly. I'd say I probably spent about 5 hours in total going over the case study, re-going over it, making all my notes and my prep, and then building the financial plan. I think roughly 50 hours in terms of, and that's alongside gathering all my evidence and data for assumptions, which I'd kind of done along the same time. And then I think in terms of the write-up and the check-in, maybe about 18 hours in total. Writing it up, amending, then printing off, checking, then printing off, checking again. And then for my amendments, because it was such a simple change and I didn't need to go back into the financial plan and change all of the spreadsheets around, I think probably another 10 hours in there. So in total, roughly around between 80 and 90 hours, I think, in total.
Wow. That is probably the lowest number of hours of anybody who has come and told me about their journey on the podcast. So very well done for all of that. That's fantastic. And again, I guess, reflection of what you're doing day to day in your work, isn't it?
Yeah. I think because the way my process, the way I've done it, and when you going along and building the spreadsheets, you know what you're going to say in your report. So in typing up the report, I wasn't then sat wrecking my brain thinking, what do I say here? I knew what I wanted to say, and I knew what the outcome and kind of the advice was going to be.
Yes, yeah, fantastic. And so now it's been, only just a few months, 3 or 4 months, hasn't it, since you found out that you've passed?
Yeah.
But, during your journey, looking back now, has it changed your thought process or the approach, the way that you give financial planning advice to clients moving forward?
I would say yes and no. The only reason I say no is because when I came to Eldon, as I said before, there was 3 planners had the CFP certification. So our process and advice process with clients and the planning has very much been built around the way the CFP case study kind of runs as well, because it's the level 7 qualification and the highest level we can get. So I've kind of almost been trained into that mold almost. But I would say yes, in that when I did the spreadsheets, the financial plan and everything, it's not like just using Voyant where it spits out the projections for you. The diligence you need on the input, and how that can have such a knock-on effect. Kind of, you don't pick that up when you're using Voyant as such. You just go back and then change a figure and then go and look at the projection again. Whereas seeing the numbers and how they all change when you're using the spreadsheets kind of shows how it can throw everything out so drastically with one tiny change. And I would also say the concise wording in reports was more apparent to me after this, and which something that I've then carried into my own advice with work is learning to make things more concise.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, isn't it, when we're writing, we write a lot more as if we're having a conversation with the client. We tend to,
Yeah.
And actually the clients already trust you, so some of that actually isn't needed. So I think it's really interesting lesson that, I find that some people come and say, oh, Jackie, I can't get it in 60 pages, or I've written 67 pages, what shall I do? I'm like, snip, 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 chop out that waffle. But it's hard actually to face the fact that actually all of us do it, me included, that we have this tendency, and I think particularly to waffle, but particularly within the case study, because you can't interact with the client. Whereas obviously in real life, if you'd forgotten to ask something, or when you're working on the client financial plan, for example, you suddenly think, oh gosh, yes, well, maybe there's another alternative potentially to advice that I could give, but I need to ask them about it. Obviously, with the case study, you don't have that luxury of being able to pick up the phone and have a quick chat to them like you do in real life, do you?
No. And that was kind of challenging as well, because then it was learning to write in the report. You either made an assumption about something or kind of said this was omitted and go from there. Whereas, as you say, in real life, you would just go and ask a client. So that I did find a little bit more tricky.
A bit tough, isn't it, how to approach it? Because it's kind of what you can make an assumption for without just making it up, basically, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's because you have to make a reasoned assumption, but then you don't know this client in the way that you know your clients that you work with. You would know if that assumption was probably reasonable to make. Whereas reading the case study and learning the client from a piece of paper, you don't know if that is maybe something they would do, something they wouldn't do, something they may or may not agree with.
Or something they forgot to tell you.
Yeah,
that makes a material difference.
Yeah.
It is tough. It is tough with these case studies. And so, looking back now, you've learned lots of interesting things. Do you think that you've learned things about yourself other than, how, not waffling in a financial plan for a client moving forward? Are there any other things that you've learned about yourself along the way?
Going into it, I was very not overwhelmed, but thinking, oh my God, this is quite a big thing with it being a level 7 case study, and seeing how close I got first time with passing it, having just omitted the justification for annuity over drawdown. She kind of helped me understand the level I'm maybe at, rather than underestimating myself a bit more.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think just that really.
Interesting, isn't it? I think we all have that little pocket of kind of imposter syndrome. And
Yeah.
I was listening to Stephen Bartlett the other day, and he was saying, he suffers with imposter syndrome as well. And he's made a pact with himself never to say that phrase again, because it's just about diving in and trying and putting yourself to the test. Because if you don't try, then it's all going on in your head, and you've actually got to, in this case, get it out on paper. So quite interesting how I think we all suffer with it, whether we like to admit or not, don't we?
Yeah, definitely.
Excellent. Well, we are nearly at the end of our conversation today, James. And I just wanted to ask you if you had any tips for anybody who is thinking about becoming a certified financial planner in the UK or starting on their journey, and maybe they're sitting on the fence at the moment. So just share a few tips with us if you can, please.
Yeah, I would definitely say speaking to people, listening to podcasts, how to get into it, what you need to be aware of going into doing it would definitely help. I did a few, and I'm not sure whether it helped or hindered, but it definitely made me aware of what I need to be doing for the case study. Whether it then led me to think, oh my God, am I ready for this? Was kind of a different thing, but it helped having that awareness so that when I went into doing it, I knew what to expect.
Yeah.
And having people to talk to, particularly at work, who'd done it, definitely helped as well. I don't think it's something you could just go out on your own and do off the bat.
Interesting. And, as far as, approach to the course, and, obviously we did a course together, didn't we? Would you recommend that, how would you recommend people get themselves organised before, embarking on such a big piece of work?
First thing, know the case study inside out. I would sit and read it, make notes, highlight it, come back to it. Absolutely knew it inside out. But then when I was making the recommendations or building the points, I would always come back and revisit it and think, is this actually meeting the goals and the objectives? Because we can go away and think, well, I want to write this piece. This is the advice I would give. But if it's not what the client's looking for, then it's useless. So it's just remembering to come back to the case study when you're going through it and think, just refreshing, is this what the client's looking for? Yes. If it's not, drop it, forget about it.
Yes. And I think with doing the Excel spreadsheets, they're such a big piece of the work, in creating this financial plan. It's quite easy to lose sight of what those client objectives are, isn't it? Because you end up down this rabbit hole of numbers.
Yeah, definitely. I caught myself doing it, thinking, I need to do this, and then I come back to the plan, think, but she wasn't actually looking for that, so I don't need to. Even if it might the advice might be correct, and it may be, for instance, if you're thinking IHT planning, but then you come back to the case study and that's not what they're actually looking for, then it's not needed.
Yes. And what about the family support that you had at home?
I just took days off. My wife there was only me and my wife at the time, so it was a bit more straightforward to do. She understood. She'd just cook tea for me. Understood I was doing it, and it was kind of a temporary thing. But I like to just lock myself away and be almost left alone.
Yes, get that clear headspace to dive deep into it, don't you, without any distractions. I read some research that for every time we're interrupted, it takes at least 20 minutes to get back to where you were before, prior to the interruption. So again, it's about finding what works for you, isn't it? And then getting all your family around you to make sure that, they're in the background, whether it is making tea or, whatever it might be, giving you the support that you need.
Yeah, and that's another reason why I found it better working in afternoon and evening, because I could do kind of any jobs I needed to do around the house, walk the dogs in the morning, get all them done, and be in a clear frame of mind that later on I'm felt fully focused on doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. So you didn't have it nagging in the back of your mind while you were trying to embark on your mammoth piece of work. Absolutely. Well, James, that's the end of our interview today. I just wanted to say thank you so much for joining me and for sharing your story on how you became a certified financial planner, and all the best for your financial planning advice and profession in the future.
No, you're welcome. Thank you for everything, Jackie.
It's really interesting, isn't it, to listen to different people who have different experiences of gaining their certified financial planner certification, or maybe developing the financial planning profession at large. If you know anybody who you think might be interested in listening to any of these podcasts, then please do pass on our details. That's it from me. I hope you've enjoyed today's episode. See you again soon. Bye for now.